Welcome to Ringsiders Wrestling. Today I am joined by a very special guest, a person I've been a fan of for a long time. You may know him from his time with the Osirian Portal and the breakdancing Pharaoh and Massis. Today I'm joined by Ophidian. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you for having me, but let me help you out a little bit, my friend. If you're going to introduce me, it should be like this. I am venomous. I am vile. I am the master of snake style. The Cobra Supernova, the Ouroboros Ophidian.
Perfect. Do you reckon you could come on the show more often just to do the intros for the guests?
I will absolutely show up just for the intros. No
Perfect.
problem.
Because that's just put my intro to shame. But that's great. I'm loving. I said to you before we started recording, loving the mask. That's one of my favorite masks in wrestling. There's a promo shot that I used for the Twitter image where it's just a close up of your mask, and I think it's one of the coolest ones I've seen. Who came up with that design? Was it yourself?
It was myself. I actually make my own masks as well. That wasn't always the case. Day one wasn't me making my mask, but at this point in my career, I make alongside my wife with our company, Closet Champion. I make everything that I wear alongside most of the Chikara roster. All of the Wrestle Factory graduates are made by myself and my wife. The longtime veterans, if you're in long enough, you might get gear from someplace else, or you might find a specific seamstress you like. But for the most part, I would say about 80 to 85% of the roster is made by me.
That's so cool, and I imagine it must be really helpful for yourself, especially being a wrestler, being able to make your own gear. Because I know we've spoken to a few wrestlers before. They'll have these ideas for gear, and they have to get them drawn out. They have to send off for it and wait for it to come back. With yourself, do you just come up with an idea and then go straight into making it? Is it a fairly simple process?
It isn't on the initial creation of it. A lot of the times the ideas that you come up with don't, you might be able to translate it onto paper, but that doesn't translate into a physical, 3D object. So there's a middle ground that you have to find with what's in your head to what you can actually put down on paper, and then what you put down on paper being actually constructed in the real world. It takes some finagling, and it takes a lot of do-overs.
Yeah, I can imagine it would do. I'm a web designer, so usually I'm a creative in a way, I guess. Like, I'll come up with an idea, and as soon as I start to do it, I'll be like, well, that looks terrible, or it's just not realistic. Is that the case with wrestling gear too? You'll have an idea, and then when you start to make it, you're like, well, this ain't gonna look very good, or is that ever the case?
Oh yeah, absolutely. There's definitely many a scrap pieces in this. You can kind of see some of the sewing stuff in the background.
Yeah.
There's many a scrap pieces in this room from all the stuff we've made that just didn't work or failed projects. But that's a lot of the fun. I think especially coming from a web design background, it's a similar idea. Like, a lot of the fun is the experimentation, is finding what is successful through failure. Right?
Absolutely, yeah. I'll find that before I get to the final version of a website. I've been through about 20 previous versions of it to get me to that point, and I'll look at the earlier versions that I did, and I'll hate them because I'll just be like, why did I think that looked good? And I'm thinking it would be the same with you too. Doing, I can't even imagine how to start with ring gear creation. I'm guessing you have some kind of. Do you draw the designs first, and then do you just start making it after, or?
That's actually what I started. Uh, my wife and I started a YouTube series for our company, Closet Champion. And we're kind of going over that stuff through our YouTube channel. Every project can be a little bit different. Some are already kind of thought up and created and just given to us to make. Like, we're just on the creation side of it. We're not there for the conception of it. And then there's some stuff that is fully formed in house from concept to execution. So we get to run the gamut in all of that. And I don't do any drawing myself. That is one artistic ability I've not garnered. That is all my wife. That is all Kate Nix.
I know how that feels, drawing. Man. Hey, so you're the artist in this duo.
She is. She absolutely is.
I know how that feels. I might be a creative, but when it comes to pen and paper, I'm probably the worst drawer in the world. I don't think I can draw a stick man, and Yeah, I wasn't blessed with any artistic ability, but it's
I
good to
can't
know
hold a
that
piece of chalk without snapping it in half.
I know, yeah. So it sounds like you've been able to keep busy in this time where some wrestlers might not have that creative outlet like yourself to be making gear or stuff like that. Some wrestlers right now are struggling to fill that space that wrestling would usually fit. What have you been doing apart from gear creation to like it must be weird, like wrestling most weekends, if not every week. And what's it been like?
Well, I've always been very hands-on in every aspect of professional wrestling. It doesn't matter what part of it exists, whether it's the audio side of it, the video side, the gear making side, the in-ring performance or the teaching. I've literally have, especially through Chikara, I've had my hands in all of it. I'm outside of just performing in ring. Obviously, I'm an in-ring performer. I've been doing so since 2006. My official Chikara debut was 2007, but my first match ever was in 2006. So obviously the in-ring stuff I've been teaching, whether it be at the Wrestle Factory or now at the Worldwide Dojo, as well. So I've had my hand in the sculpting and forming of young minds coming through the schools. Obviously there's the gear making. I also have done a lot of the video production. Especially if you've been watching all the Crucible stuff, a lot of that was either filmed or directed or created by myself along with another. And I've been doing that kind of stuff for years for Chikara. My wife, being a musician, she makes not just music for herself, but has made theme songs and scores for videos and wrestling content. There isn't a part of wrestling that I don't have my hands in. So if I
That's really
can't be
cool. Like,
in ring performing, I will, there's a million other things that I can do. I've tried my best to make sure that I'm an asset in every way possible in every aspect of wrestling, because you never know what's going to happen tomorrow, right? And because I set myself up pretty well before any of this happened, there's no way predicting that we'd be all stuck at home for months. But all these things that I've been doing for years has led me to the ability to constantly create, even if I'm not in ring, for the wrestling world.
that's really cool to know because, like you said, well, I was saying earlier, with some wrestlers, they're struggling to fill that gap, and understandably, it takes up a huge part of their life. But
Absolutely.
it's good that you're able to keep creative and keep those creative juices flowing because wrestling is creative,
Hmm.
and it's especially when you're doing it pretty much full time to not have that in your life anymore. I guess for anybody who has a regular job, it's crazy to not have that in your life. But with yourself, you're able to fill that gap. You're able to carry on with the creation of gear and the video production and stuff like that.
Yes, I took
Which
that leap
is,
in 2016 for me. So up until on and off, trying to make wrestling a full-time job, injuries
mm,
happen, you end up having to go back to work. You kind of have that up and down period until, for me, it was 2016. And from then on, I've been working as pro wrestling as my, not only my main source of income, but really my job.
yeah,
I can wake up every day and say that wrestling, not performing in ring or just gear making, I mean, just wrestling, the wrestling industry as
the
a
industry.
whole is my job. uh,
And you said that you debuted officially in 2006. Yeah,
yes.
right. And you debuted in Chikara in 2007, was it?
Hmm.
Yeah. Okay. So 2007, 2008 will have been the first time that I saw you wrestle in Chikara, I believe.
Yes.
I myself was training to be a wrestler. It failed, but I gave it a go. And at the time, the biggest inspiration for me as a young aspiring wrestler was Chikara because it had quite a few people watching it, but not everybody knew about it. And you had these guys like Chuck Taylor, yourself, and all of these guys coming in who were doing these crazy things because I'd only really seen WWE up to that point and some Ring of Honor. But when I found Chikara, it kind of changed my worldview of what wrestling was or could be because I was seeing comedy matches, I was seeing serious wrestling, classic British wrestling style, all of it like a melting pot of wrestling in this one promotion. And I think early Chikara for me is a very nostalgic thing. And what are your early memories like of Chikara when you first got there? What did you think of Chikara? Was it the same way I'd looked at it as a fan?
Uh,
Like,
I'll say this before I get into that. I think one of the things that I've enjoyed most about the British wrestling scene throughout, my many travels over there is Chikara's influence on the
mm,
scene. there's a lot of the current generation that are, whether they're signed to WWE now or headlining, British shows or going on to larger things, that were influenced by Chikara. There are companies like Attack and Fight Club Pro,
Mm,
whose roster is clearly influenced by what was, what they were watching when they were younger.
yeah.
And you can really see that through all levels of British wrestling, especially with the way Chikara focused on bringing British wrestlers over, like Johnny Kidd and Johnny Saint. Even later, through the Johnny Kidd Invitational and stuff like that. Like those influences are still there to this day.
Yeah.
It wasn't just a phase. But the early days of Chikara, I'll be honest, there wasn't much. I didn't know much about Chikara before coming into professional wrestling. When I joined Chikara in 2006 to start training, it was a very small company.
Mm,
And while you still had the Chris Hero and Claudio Castagnoli types that were, there as the trainers and such, it was still a very unknown company overall. But the thing about Chikara that really drew me in was how much fun it was. There was a sense of like wonder being a part of that crew. There was it was infectious, the desire to create something that doesn't exist in the wrestling world, and you could tell how passionate not just Quackenbush and, like I said, Hero and Claudia were, but the entire roster was impassioned to create things that didn't exist, and it's hard to not enjoy that and kind of fall into that with everyone else. I I love that time period in Chikara for sure. We had such a crazy roster, like you said. Chuck Taylor, you had Ricochet, you had Pac, you had Player Uno
mm,
and Stupefied. You had Drew Gulak, you had your Orange Cassidy. So you had so many of these guys that were learning their craft in their early days before they went on to do some, amazing stuff in the world of professional wrestling. And it was an environment that I don't you couldn't replicate again, with the roster that we had.
it's incredible the amount of talent that's walked through the doors of Chikara. It's basically a who's who of modern day wrestling. Like
Yes.
even CM Punk had a short stint there too. You've got your Colt Cabanas. Like you said, everybody is being through Chikara, and I think when I was watching when I was younger, especially guys like you, Chuck Taylors, you knew at some point they were going to be picked up by a major promotion. I don't think anyone would have foreseen it would be AEW for Chuck Taylor unless you were
Yeah.
psychic. But you always knew that these guys you were watching were going to be known even like 15 years in the future, and they are. Everybody who has been with Chikara has at some point or still is doing more for themselves. And I think that's testament to probably the training, the quality of training that Chikara provides. And when you were starting training in Chikara, did you find it eye opening? Was that your first introduction to training to be a wrestler?
When I joined Chikara's school, it wasn't Chikara's school at the time. It was a joint venture with CZW.
Mm,
So they had it was still the Wrestle Factory, but it was a combined school of both companies. So you can still find the logos online. It was the Chikara symbol wrapped in barbed wire,
yeah.
which is a crazy visual. If you know, if you know your Chikara, anything wrapped in barbed wire seems way too much. Um, so going into that environment, you had that mixed culture. And that was also very enticing because you really had outlooks coming from all different directions. There was a lot to take in. It could almost be a bit overwhelming. When you first walking into a school, the
Mm,
training facility was in the ECW arena, and I grew up going to that venue. You
that's
know,
awesome.
um, I never missed a show. Once I was able to go on my own, and I had my own vehicle, I never missed a show. Um, and to go from a fan, on one side of the barricade to the other in that arena, was definitely something that I don't. It very few people get the chance to do, to spend your time learning your craft in that venue. And that had multiple schools. There were a ton of companies running in 2006. PWU, Velocity Pro, IWA Mid-South had come through, ROH, Chikara, CZW. There are a ton of companies that not only wrestled in that venue but also had schools there too. There were multiple schools, and yeah, it was You'd sneak into other companies' classes sometimes. You'd learn a little bit from the PWU school. You learn a little bit when CCW and Chikara eventually split, which is a little bit into my training. I kind of sneak into those classes. So you got to have a little bit of everything.
Of course, I think that's very important. That's one thing I did learn in my few years wrestling, training to be a wrestler, is you can't learn from too many people. Like that, there's no such thing. If
Yeah.
you're training at one place, go train somewhere else too, because they'll teach you something you're not learning at the other place. They might teach you a different style, how to do something a little bit better. And I think that's something a lot of wrestlers nowadays are doing. It was frowned upon when I was training. My trainer just said to me, "You can train with me and nobody else." But once I opened my eyes to it, I was like, "Oh, you should be training everywhere." And like you said, you trained at Chikara, you trained at PWU. Yeah, do you feel like you got for lack of a better term, a melting pot of experience from doing that? Do you think it
I
made you into the performer you are now?
Absolutely. And I mean, just from Chikara alone, the the list of people I got to train under and the list of people trained me is some of the best in the world, right?
Mm,
Mike Quackenbush, Chris Hero, who became Cassius Ono in NXT, Claudio Castagnoli, who's Cesaro, Sarah Del Rey, who's now the assistant head coach in NXT,
hmm
um, Jorge Skida Rivera, who was the head trainer of the Toriumon Gym, Ultimo Dragon School, the guy essentially what would become Dragon Gate,
Yeah.
as well as El Pandetta, getting to train under guys like Delirious, and of course my travels throughout the world, being able to train at the Osaka Pro Dojo and the Zero One Dojo for a bit when I got to go over there, and of course traveling throughout Europe and training all the different schools over there as well. I I'm definitely of the mindset that you are never done learning. It was
Mm.
something that was instilled very early, not just in my career, but in life, because I took martial arts growing up. So I did 12 years of Goju-Ryu, Taekwondo, Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, and it was something that was always, always, always instilled in us, is that you are never done learning. Um, you just cannot be. It's impossible to know everything. So you should spend, your time, at least if you're working towards a specific goal, shall we spend your time learning as much as you can and absorbing.
Do you think one of the reasons that you never done learning is to do with the fact that the fans are always changing and what the fans want?
Absolutely. Not only what the fans want, but the product itself is always evolving. The next generation is always crafting something new that doesn't exist. There's always as a youth come up in any industry, not just pro wrestling, but in music and movies and television, whatever it is, whatever artistic endeavor you choose, the younger culture is always looking to revolt against what was already established.
Sure.
So, there's always this hope that they're crafting something new that doesn't exist, that you can learn. And I mean, even now teaching and doing what I do with the students, I'm learning new things from them, new performers I've never heard of, new companies that are forming, new entertainment that's inspiring them to become pro wrestlers. What made me want to be a wrestler when I was a kid is not the same thing as the 18-year-old walking into a wrestling school today. Um,
That's a really good point, because I did realize this recently, that when I first got into indie wrestling, it was like your Ring of Honor, Chikara. But with that being what now 16, 17 years ago, even independent wrestling has evolved and changed. And
Absolutely.
when I'm looking at the new promotions nowadays, I don't know some of these guys, and I haven't ever seen some of these moves, and everybody's got an on-demand service, and I'm like, wrestling wasn't like this back in my day. And I'm like, how old am I? Like, it's mind blowing how much even independent wrestling has changed in that short period of time.
Yeah. Whether it be from, I think it even happens a lot quicker. Like there's from 2006 to 2010, um, you could go a 5-year period from 2006 to 2011. From my first 5 years, when I first joined to where 2011 was completely different. For me, 2011 was my first viral video of a Masters of myself doing the most illegal move in the history of professional wrestling. And in 2006, we weren't imagining that you can become popular or gain any kind of notoriety off of a video going viral. So like even within that 5-year period, and then from 2011 to 2016, like you can just see it in even smaller chunks how quickly our industry has changed.
I'm so glad you mentioned the viral video, because that's what I was going to ask you next. Uh, the most illegal move in wrestling history is something that a lot of people, even casual fans and people who aren't fans, have seen. I remember being at a pub not too far from here, and one of my friends said to me, "Oh, you like wrestling, right?" And I was like, "Yeah." And he was like, oh, have you seen this? And the video was the most illegal move in wrestling history, and where you're doing the hypnosis. And I was like, yeah, I've definitely seen that, as has every other wrestling fan. It's fantastic. But he has no interest in wrestling, and he thought it was hilarious, along with the grenade spot with Chuck Taylor. Those were two things which really stood out and got the casuals and the people who weren't wrestling fans kind of interested in this, like, outside of WWE wrestling.
Mhm.
And I've always thought that was such a cool spot, and wanted to ask you, how did that come about? Like, who pitched that spot? Who pitched that idea?
If you look back at the Osirian Portals, not Ophidian, but the Osirian Portals debut match, which was in 2007, September show for Chikara at the arena. I can't remember the name of the show right off. Cybernetical and Robin, maybe? No, that wasn't it. I forget the name of the show off the top of my head. A lot of head injuries. But we've been doing the hypnosis since our very first match. So that was something that, Amasis and I have always done. When going into the match with Ryan Slater and Joe Gacy, who were our opponents in that viral video, we had known them for a very long time. Joe Gacy and Ryan Slater, we actually backyard wrestled with well before, we all started training.
Mm-hmm.
So we had been friends and were willing to take risks and chances with each other that normally you wouldn't with, people you had just met, because we had known them for so long. We came into pro wrestling together as a group. So they were longtime friends. So we were really receptive of one another's ideas and what we wanted to do. A lot of people don't realize or know, because they've never seen the match. That match starts off with Amasis, with us getting jumped on the outside, and Amasis getting power bombed to the floor through 4 chairs. Like, that was step 1 of that match. There was so much violence and chaos that preceded that dance spot, which is why the moment got so over with that live audience there, because it happened at a CZW show. A lot of people are confused as to think, they believe it happened at Chikara because Amasis and I were so representative of Chikara.
Mm-hmm.
But it was at a CZW show, so we wanted to juxtapose the that offbeat, comedy at the end with some really chaotic violence at the start, to really give you both ends. The violence and the chaos is what CZW is used to, and what the Runaways represented, Joe Gacy and Ryan Slater.
Mm-hmm.
But when it came time to the in-ring action, they weren't able to overcome us as in-ring technicians, and of course the comedy that ensued at the end of it. It was a great idea, and it worked well for that live crowd, and we gave them the right mix of wrestling and fun and whimsy. Especially at a place like CZW, a lot of people don't believe that would be the spot that would go viral.
That stands out, yeah.
That's why it did.
Yeah, because like you said, it juxtaposed with the brutality of the first spot. And yes, it stood out because that's not usually something you'd get in CZW. It was all about the ultra violence. You didn't usually get too much comedy. So did you expect that spot would be remembered so long after? Did you have any inclination that it would be as popular as it was?
No, that match happened in November of 2010, and it was just the match for us. It got us over with that crowd. We solidified our place in CZW with that match. That wasn't our first match for CZW, but that was the match that won us over. And then we eventually made it to the finals of that tournament. A lot had happened, and it wasn't until months after that match that video went viral. So when it did, it was a complete shock. It was a surprise, because, again, that content had existed already for months.
Yeah, I'm thinking about it. Like, it was something that hadn't really been seen that much at the time. I remember when I saw it, I was like, I haven't really seen anything like this before. And I think that's why Chikara and anywhere else he wrestled really stood out, because Chikara was doing something different. They were giving you a little bit of comedy, a little bit of technical. Everything worked. And nowadays, I think it's kind of happening again with cinematic matches. And like, especially in WWE at the moment, they're really trying the hand with cinematic matches. Given the current world circumstances, they're trying to make the best of what they've got. And I think it's really working. Lucha Underground have done it previously, and it really worked for them. Do you feel like cinematic matches are going to be something we see more of going into the future? Do you think it's a good idea?
Well, it's something that even Chikara had been doing for well before. We had the
Mm,
not so successful movie, um, the Ashes film that was filmed in 2013, and of course, even more recently, um, with the Crucible storyline, where we filmed um, the 6 episode series that had a lot of cinematic wrestling in it.
yeah,
Uh, I think that there is a place for it in professional wrestling without a doubt, especially now in this time period where we're not going to be able to, um, perform in front of live crowds for at least the rest of this year.
yeah.
Like to have full arenas like we're used to. So there's no better time to experiment than right now. I would like to spend this time working the kinks out of what cinematic wrestling can look like, because I think that there is a place for it, especially in the larger scale, like WWE. For big payoff and blow off matches that you couldn't do normally. Like imagine if we did that Dusty Rhodes match back in WCW. They had the truck bed match. And I can't remember the exact name, where Dusty Rhodes and another performer fought on the back of a moving truck.
Yeah,
Like
that's crazy.
right? Yeah, that's wild. Or even the Dungeon of Doom match, the Doomsday match, or cage match, where you had Hogan and Macho Man fighting through all these different levels against the Dungeon of Doom, right? Back in that day, they were attempting something that would feel more cinematic
Mm,
than what professional wrestling was already offering. It just wasn't the right time for it. It was a little too early for wrestling to have adopted that. But if you tried those matches now, with the technology that we have and the way that pro wrestling allows itself to suspend its belief in its current day, um, you'd be able to get away with a much cooler, um, looking match, and maybe Dustin Rhodes wouldn't have been fired after that match was
yeah.
done. Uh,
You've got me brainstorming now. Like, which other matches would work in a cinematic that we've seen before? Like
the boiler room match
the
between
boiler room
Taker
match.
and Mankind.
Yeah, the Punjabi prison.
Yeah,
Film it in an actual Punjabi prison. Like,
yeah.
let's go all out. I like my wrestling to be a bit wacky at times. I really don't mind. My disbelief is always suspended, and sometimes the wackier it is, the better. And for that reason, I really enjoyed the Boneyard match with the Undertaker, because I feel like it's added another maybe 5 years of WrestleManias to the Undertaker. Like, I imagine it took a lot to film, but physically you can get away with doing a lot more. And
Yes.
the Firefly Funhouse match, for example, was just all the right amounts of crazy. It was like we were actually inside Bray Wyatt's head somehow. I don't know, but I didn't question it. And with
Uh,
the Money in the Bank match, you won't see that normally. Like, I'd personally love to see more of it, and I'd like to see other promotions adopt it. But I think, like you said, it needed to be the right time, and I don't think there's been a better time now than to say, well, let's try it. What's the worst that can happen? And do you, do you think it's going to be something that sticks about?
yeah. I think so. The independents have been experimenting with it for a little while. You've seen it, like you said already, in Lucha Underground. It may not stick in these next couple of years, but I think when we're looking at our entertainment over the course of like the way of wrestling evolves in 15 to 20 years from now, when you have another generation of Ospreys and Ricochets coming up, or wrestlers that have gone through uh, some kind of videography or cinematic, you know, um, education, we'll be able to see a better version of that later down the line. As pro wrestling is slowly becoming more accepting of other art forms and other forms of entertainment being involved in it. Um,
I think it's your personal your character. I think is something that could lend itself to cinematic matches, and especially with the early like Osirian Portal, I
yeah.
think you could have explored a lot with that, like actually having a match inside a pyramid or something, or something
Uh,
crazy. But that would have been awesome. And speaking of your character, something I wanted to ask is how did you actually come up with Ophidian? And in the earlier days of Massis, was it something you both came up with, or
um, all pro wrestling schools and almost all pro wrestling careers are molded by their trainers in some capacity. It doesn't matter what company you work for, whether it's WWE, AEW, um, WCW, Ring of Honor, all of your major companies are going to have directive given to their performers. And while like a good pro wrestling school, a good pro wrestling trainer will allow its trainees to adapt to their own personal beliefs and their own, personality. We'll be able to kind of morph it to the way we feel it should be portrayed, but we're still all given directives no matter what level you're at. So there was some say, absolutely, from the Chikara brass, from Quackenbush and those, and helping us craft what we are. But at the end of the day, it still was up to Amasis and myself to create what we were. So while I knew, again, there was some directive, I got to design my own mask. I got to come up with the name. I got to create all those aspects of what Ophidian is. I believe in this phrase, and I say it a lot. I say it to all my students. I say it almost every podcast. This is absolutely something I truly believe in. That's talent borrows and genius steals. And I don't mean, when I say that, I don't mean steal from within your own industry. I don't mean steal, watch New Japan shows and steal everything you see there. What I mean by that is allow yourself to be influenced by the things you enjoy in life. We are the culmination. You and I are the culmination of everything we've ever experienced, every conversation we've had, all the media we've ingested. The reason why we're both sitting here today is because of things that led us to this point, right? Our love of pro wrestling. It's inspired us to do these things. It's inspired you to create a podcast and have a YouTube channel and do all that. And it's inspired me to do what I do. So talent borrows and genius steals. So I've stolen from everything that I absolutely love. From my original mask being an inspiration for Serpentor from G.I. Joe, to my love of Shaw Brothers films, specifically the movie Five Deadly Venoms, to stuff like Mortal Kombat and how that, and WMAC Masters from the early 90s. All these things have kind of pick and choose all the things that I like to create who I am. And the same thing goes for Amasis. There's a lot of exploitation film inside of what he does and where he's at. A lot of those the blaxploitation films, I'm sorry, from the 70s and coming up, in the way that he spoke and the things that he did to be the Funky Pharaoh. While this is still unique to who I am and what I'm about, I allowed those things to be the basis of what the original character was, and it led me to the point where I am today, to be the unique entity that I am.
The people I've spoken to previously always say, and it's the cliche saying that you get in wrestling, it's the best characters are just the people with the volume turned up to 11. And do you feel like that's the case with you? Is Ophidian just you, but with the volume turned right up with a mask?
The mask lets me be something more than I am. It is me. This is 100% me. However, I don't think I would have found me without Ophidian.
Okay.
Without the mask.
So, I like saying that, because do you feel like without the Ophidian character, what do you think your wrestling career would have looked like?
If you've seen any of my backyard footage, it would have been a completely different path. We did a GCW show a year ago now. Was it 2 years ago? We did GCW ran a backyard wrestling show last summer.
Right.
It was last summer, where we all reprised our old backyard wrestling gimmicks. And my backyard gimmick and what I wanted to be was not where I am now. Complete, like, over the top, not family friendly, adult oriented gimmick. That is not this. And while, like, at the time I was having fun with it, I was younger, that really wasn't me. Like, it was me, but it wasn't. Yeah, that's a great way to put it. It's probably more who I wished I was, which was kind of like a knockoff of the Chris Jericho at the time, the early Chris Jericho stuff, Sexy Eddie, characters like that.
Dude, we've all been there. We've all been there. We've all wanted to be Chris Jericho or Shawn Michaels at some point. It happens.
Yeah. And I'm glad, and that's one of the reasons why I was very glad I ended up at a place like Chikara, is it kind of like, hey, calm down, kid. I know that's what you think you want to be, but try this first. Like, give this a shot. And it's very true. You see this with a lot of characters. We see it with all the characters that we love today. You can see that evolution from who they maybe thought they were, or who we perceive them to be, to who they really are now. The first version of Undertaker when he debuted in 1992, I believe it was, is not the Undertaker we love today, right? I think the most popular version of the Undertaker is post Ministry, like that long black trench coat, the cowboy hat, like
Yeah.
when he was able to combine the gunslinger, dead man, look. Same thing with the Undertaker, with Triple H. I'm sorry, like the blue blood becoming the degenerate and then becoming the cerebral assassin. Like we wouldn't have got to the cerebral assassin if he didn't start off as the blue blood. But the cerebral assassin is his ultimate form, right? It's his Super Saiyan.
Yeah,
It is. And that's what I mean. Like you need that direction to understand who and what you are. Like being able to put yourself in another's shoes, or in this case, this other character's shoes, this character that may be out of your comfort zone, allows you to understand who you are, both in and outside of your own comfort zones.
So you say about the ultimate form of Triple H and the Undertaker. Is this the ultimate form of Ophidian, or is there still plenty more left to explore with the Ophidian character and yourself? Where do you go from here?
I think this is currently the truest version of me, without a doubt. The Ouroboros, which is the symbol that I wear on my face, the snake eating itself, is the symbol of rebirth, right? And I donned it during a time period when I no longer had a Masis, when I was going through a personal change, and a philosophical change as a character. And I think this is absolutely my ultimate form. Does that mean that it's over as far as like evolution goes? No. I can't say that because in 2 or 3 years, we don't know where wrestling will be at or where I'll be at. I'm a big fan of Dragon Ball and the Dragon Ball shows, Dragon Ball Z, Dragon Ball Super. And even Goku found another evolutionary form to hit, You thought Super Saiyan 3 was it. No, the Super Saiyan God. And then this, he figured out, oh man, there might be even one higher than that, Super Saiyan God Blue or whatever, You just never know. You might come across something that
the symbol
inspires you to go further.
The snake eating itself is kind of like the infinity symbol anyway. So
yeah.
That would kind of suggest that you're never done with it. It's just a constant state of rebirth.
Never over, always again.
I like that. I do like that. So you say like you don't know where it's going to be in 3 years' time, and you don't know where the Ophidian character or yourself on a personal level is going to be. But is there anywhere you'd like to be? Is there anywhere, like, of course, the obvious choices? Would you like to show up with Chikara alumni Chuck Taylor and Orange Cassidy? Is there anything you'd like to do with AEW?
I mean, who wouldn't want to be in the Gentleman's Club?
Right. I could see you fitting right in with that, actually.
I like those guys a lot. Actually, those are all guys that I came up with in wrestling. We spent not only just a ton of time training together, but of course wrestling. I wrestled an entire group of guys. The goal for me has never been WWE. My love of professional wrestling came from the independents. Like, WWE made me love pro wrestling, but the independents made me want to be a professional wrestler. Being at the ECW arena and being in that infectious environment, pushed me over the edge to become a pro wrestler. So part of me has always loved the indie mentality, and I enjoy life on the independents. We can make a living off the independents that is just as viable and as comfortable, as any other career. And you're seeing that now amongst a ton of independent performers that we're able to make a living off of whatever, we can out of the industry. If it happened, stuff like AEW and all that, absolutely. We never say no, but that's never been the end goal. The end goal is creating what I am now, is being able to be a part of a major school and crafting, like creating and being in an environment where I can make video content, I can make audio content, I can make your, I enjoy being able to flex those creative muscles. And you don't always get that when you're in a position under a contract on major television where your job becomes you only wrestle and that's it. That's all we have time for you to do. So I don't necessarily know exactly, but I do know that I hope that someday I end up in a creative role where I can flex those muscles on a regular basis.
That would be cool. And I think that you said like the indie mentality is something that you really like, that you're able to go out there on a weekly basis, or even more often than that, maybe every day at some points, and flex those creative muscles. I think if there's one promotion that does that, it's keeps that indie mentality, but on a larger scale. It's definitely going to be like an AEW or somewhere like that, because a lot of these guys are still able to retain their character. And people like Orange Cassidy, for example, he was a huge name on the independents. People loved what he was doing, and a lot of people said that's not going to work on a large scale. It didn't just work; it exceeded all expectations. And
he's the only AEW roster member with their own commercial on TNT.
Absolutely.
Only one.
Nobody else. Not Kenny Omega, Chris Jericho. It's Orange Cassidy.
He's got beach towels now.
Beach towels.
They maybe last week's episode, I think it was 2 weeks ago or so, where Chuck Taylor and Trent accompanied him and revealed his beach towels to the live crowd and cameras. It's insane to me, because I've known him from when he was a New Jersey All-Star back in the early 2000s, before he was Orange Cassidy, which is not like a secret. He's a well-known journey from what he used to be to where he's at now. And like, I've known that guy, and it's wild to see that. He's a good friend, and I'm happy for all the success that he has. It's just crazy to me that he is becoming a household name. He's slowly morphing into that.
I can honestly say, I think there's going to be a day where we see an upset win. I say upset, it won't be, but I think Orange Cassidy is going to become AEW World Champion, and I think it's going to be a true underdog story, and everyone's going to love it, because there's casuals and people who are switching the channels, and they're seeing Orange Cassidy and they're staying for Orange Cassidy. It's not just your Chris Jericho's. They're wanting to know what he's about and what's his deal. Like, there's people in my house who aren't wrestling fans, but the people they enjoy, one of them's Orange Cassidy. And I think that's testament to, one, how much he understands his character, and two, people just want to see stuff like that nowadays. It's not just always going to be a straight up wrestling that people want to see. They want to see a bit of a nuance, a bit of a, like something a bit different. And Orange Cassidy is different. And I think the reason I asked, like, is that something you'd want to do in AEW? It's, you've always been that bit different. And I could see you fitting in somewhere with AEW. And to be honest, I could see you fitting in a lot of places. But that would be one place, as a fan, personally, I'd want to see you go.
Absolutely. There's a lot of places I've ended up that people have never expected a character like myself to. And more specifically right now, my run with GCW. I've had the chance to work, of course, your guys, the luchadors they bring in stuff. But my last match there before the COVID situation happened was against Nick Gage, and having a match like that, you can only get at a place like GCW. They're willing to take the chance and put performers like myself in the ring against other performers that you wouldn't think that would have a complete styles clash. But we're professionals, we're artists, we're good at what we do, and if you allow, it doesn't styles clash. Doesn't matter. If you put us in the ring, we'll create something that is unique to us. And there's a lot of unique situations with the characters that exist right now, especially in AEW. And there's a lot of stories to be told. And definitely a lot of stories to be told with me if I do end up in a place like that, for sure.
Yeah, and I think it's good that you're able to share that in somewhere like GCW, because GCW are doing some great things at the moment. And they're really on the map in terms of independent promotions. I hadn't heard of them up to maybe a couple of years ago, and I just thought it was another independent coming along like they do. They get a bit of a buzz, but that buzz has stayed with GCW, and especially with people like Nick Gage, and Joey Janela, for example, they're really on the map. And do you feel like GCW is going to make even bigger waves in the future?
Being a part of the company for a little over a year now, I truly believe that they are the top independent wrestling company currently on the scene. Again, like I say, top independent. Obviously, like, TV companies, I'm not considering anybody that's got a TV contract, that's separate. But as far as like a truly independent company, they are top bill. Nobody gets the reach and the attention of the wrestling community like GCW does. And as long as nothing, bad happens to the company over the course of these next few months, as we're all out of work, I do believe that they'll stay on top for years to come. The management that runs it understands what people want and where they're going. The performers are all at the top of their game right now. The current generation of headliners for GCW are guys that can carry it well into the future. Them and Beyond Wrestling, because there's some shared, talent amongst them both. Beyond is another one. Like, they're neck and neck with GCW as far as reach and like where they're going. And as long as there's competition like that, like another competitor, and I'm not saying they're competing against each other, but having those two companies create different products and reach a little bit different audience, there is that, right? Competition breeds creation, and those two companies playing off each other. There's no two better companies to have right now on top.
You're only going to get good results when you've got two of the top independent companies not competing, like you said, but both putting out a great product. It's only going to make the other one want to do better too. It's Absolutely. Like with the Monday Night Wars, that was a competition, but it brought out the best in both companies. And I think that's true of the independents too. As the talent gets better, as the promotions get better too, the whole industry thrives. And in the last 5 years, we've seen that with independent wrestling. And especially in the UK, 5 years ago we didn't have many wrestling promotions, but because they were very hard to find, right? 5 years later, you can't go down the street without seeing a promotion at the top of your street. They're everywhere right now, and that's fantastic. But
there's definitely a big difference. I've been going to the UK every year since, I'm touring since 2014. So that 2014 to now, there's a massive difference in the British scene, and I'm excited to see it. Like I've got the chance to grow, as well as a lot of American performers that have gone over there with the British scene and kind of seen it re-evolve. Like there was definitely that evolution. And we, not just the British scene, but all scenes. The American scene went through it. The Japanese scene has gone through it. There's real dips and ups and downs, and they're in an up period, or were, given certain circumstances currently. It's exciting to see.
Can we expect, when all this is settling down, can we as British fans expect to see you in the UK at some point in the next couple of years? Because that would be, you said you've wrestled in the UK quite a few times. Is there any promotions which have popped up recently which you really want to get involved with?
Riptide, without a doubt, is a place that I would love to be at.
I was hoping you'd say Riptide.
They are that perfect mix right now of standard, like what we think of traditional wrestling and cinematic. They've got the camera work. They don't go full cinematic, but they allow those moments to register in a way that their production crew is absolutely awesome. I would love to step foot in a place like Rev Pro as well, which I haven't done yet. But I've definitely gotten the chance to work with a lot of companies that I've wanted to, like Southside, before they closed down. Fight Club Pro, I've had multiple matches with them. PCW was my first ever show in the UK, and I worked with them. And of course, you got places like Progress and stuff. I've done a lot of work over there, but there's still more work to be done for sure.
That's good to see. And I think with the scene changing on what seems like a weekly basis, there's going to be so many more talents for you to mix it up with when you come over. And one of them, I think, would be a really cool match is, have you heard of Cara Noir?
I absolutely love Cara Noir and have wrestled Cara Noir in a tag match. Now, a singles match would be even better, especially at a place like Riptide. A singles match between Cara Noir and myself would be awesome. But I wrestled Cara Noir in a tag match at Lucha Britannia, which is his home promotion where we were trained at. So we got to perform there with one another.
That's awesome. I will definitely try and find that match if I can, if it's anywhere online.
Actually, no, I know it's on YouTube for sure.
I think it would be such a cool match in Riptide, because what really made me a fan of Cara was seeing his full entrance in the way that Riptide records things. It really did seem like you were watching a movie. And when he came out and he was doing all the theatrics and everything, I was just like, I got goosebumps watching it. And it would be so cool to see you as Ophidian, mix it up with Cara Noir, and both of you get those full entrances and see what you could do in somewhere like Riptide.
Yeah, for sure.
So, yeah, and just off the top of my head, there's plenty more that I could like. I'm such a big fan of UK wrestling. Obviously, it's
I
my
would love
backyard.
to.
But
I would love to work with Robbie X. I'm
Robbie
definitely
X,
definitely a
yes,
big fan of Robbie X. I'm upset it hasn't happened already over the last 6 years. But I've even got to work with a lot of younger talent that I love now, like Joe Nelson, Callum,
Newman.
like yes,
Yeah.
um, and Callum was at Lucha Britannia. Joe Nelson, who is now Lycos too. I got to work with him at Title.
Hmm.
Um, I I would love to go back to Attack. There's a lot of great guys on their roster, like the Wild Boar. Um, and you've got Chris Brooks, and there's just so much talent that I would love to get in the ring with.
Joe Nelson is so good for his age.
Yeah.
I first saw him at a promotion called WrestleGate in Nottingham. And when he came out and started wrestling, I just thought, this guy must be early 20s, considering how good he is. He must have been training for a few years. And they were like, oh, he's 17. I was like, what? How can someone be that good at wrestling at 17? I'm sat here at 31 years old. Like, what have I done with my life? But yeah,
It was a shock to me too when I walked towards them.
And to think like where someone like he might be in 5 years' time just blows my mind. Yeah, there's plenty of good talent on the UK scene, and not just on the UK scene. Australia is doing fantastic for itself as well.
Absolutely.
And like I said, Japan is always had a good scene. The American Indies, I've always loved the American Indies, and I'm really trying to watch as much as I can while on lockdown, catch up with like the last few years of what I've missed out on. Is there any other companies that you'd suggest, like for me to watch and other fans to watch that we might be missing out on?
There's some really great stuff. If you don't watch WXW out of Germany, obviously, absolutely have some great stuff. If you want to see what has inspired companies like Chikara, like if you are a fan of the 2008 to 2012, like Chikara boom when they were on top of the indies, you can see their influence from companies like Michinoku Pro and Osaka Pro if you reach out for that stuff. And obviously Michinoku Pro has produced a lot of awesome talent. And you'll see a lot of guys that you really enjoy. There's a great 6-man tag in one of the early ECW pay-per-views that featured the Michinoku Pro guys. So like if you want something a little older, Michinoku Pro is absolutely awesome to watch. I think modern day right now, WXW, as far as like pure in-ring wrestling, there's very few that are putting on the kind of technical and work rate matches that the WXW is putting on right now. But those are just two easy ones. There's some I like older wrestling. I like just as much as I like new, but stuff like I really enjoy World of Sport stuff. I like the Titanos NL Ring. There's a lot of good professional wrestling that has gone by the wayside that people have kind of forgotten about. And I don't say forgot, but there's no longer kind of relevant anymore. That always has been if you understand what came after it. If you understand the generation that was inspired by that and what they went on to make, and somebody like Quack, for example, is very loud about the influences of Michinoku Pro. But for me, like that generation, the late 90s and early 2000s is what really inspired me. So early ROH, the run when they were out of like the Murphy Rec Center and places like that. My very first live independent wrestling show that wasn't me watching was the main event was Daniel Bryan versus Samoa Joe versus Steve Corino versus there's a fourth person in the main event, maybe Loki, in like a 45-minute long match.
What a match.
Yeah, that also had Xavier defending the ROH title against Paul London. Jody Fleisch was on the show. There was an awesome show. Overall, yeah. Like I grew up on that in the early 2000s, growing up in the Philadelphia area, and like that's the generation of wrestling that's influenced me most, is that time period.
Dude, early Ring of Honor was untouchable.
Yeah.
As a fan looking back on it, it's still fond memories of how good that talent pool was. We said about Chikara Pro having a who's who of wrestling. Ring of Honor also had that kind of buzz about it where you look back now and you're like, well, he's with AEW, he's with WWE, he's a former world champion. Everyone's been through those doors. And I think that's what's so cool about looking back on the older independent wrestling is you get to see the evolution of those people. And it's such a cool thing to watch. But I will definitely be checking out some WXW. I haven't had chance to actually see much of it yet, but if you're saying it's something definitely worth watching, I'll make sure I do that in the next few days.
Especially if you like tournaments, man. The 16 karat tournament is awesome. Almost every year of it, there's some great talent in older tournaments that you can see, similar to the ROH, early ROH stuff. If you watch some of the early 16 karat tournaments, there's some super awesome talent and who's who, of today's wrestling, in them, as well as the modern day versions of the tournament, which are going to be the guys we see in 10, 15 years from now, main eventing all over the world.
Perfect. Well, before we wrap up, I always ask, is there anything coming up that you want to plug? Obviously, that's a little bit hard at the moment. With there not being many shows, it would be a bit pointless. But is there anything else you'd like to plug? Like you say you've got training school, you've got do you have anywhere we can buy your merchandise, for example?
Man, I've got plugs on plugs on
Well, we've
plugs.
got all the time in the world, so go for it.
Of course, I mentioned it earlier. There's a new YouTube channel that launched, and of course, starting a new YouTube channel is always a difficult thing to do when you're starting from scratch. That's at Closet Champion, where we're gonna give you a behind-the-scenes look on gear making and what that process is like. I also have a Patreon at patreon.com/closetchampion, where I'm currently posting ring shape videos, which is a series I created with Chikara, but has now moved on to my Patreon currently while we're in this down period. We can kind of get a behind the scenes look on training and what's necessary to kind of get your body in ring shape. So like I said, YouTube at Closet Champion, patreon.com/Closet Champion. It's a joint one with my wife. As well as, of course, following me across all social media at Ophidian Cobra. And that's on everything.
Perfect. And you can find all those.
Of course, if you don't watch it already, Saturday mornings, Action Arcade Wrestling. You can see me taking over Chikara right now, each and every week on Saturday mornings. My crucible is unstoppable. And
that's the most plugs we've got for anyone. I love it when you've got plenty of things to plug. Usually people just go, you can find me on Twitter at wrestler name, and you're just like, yep, okay, I've got this. So that's brilliant. You can find all of those descriptions or links in the description below. And thank you so much for joining us today, Ophidian. It's been an absolute pleasure talking to you. As a fan of your work for many years now, I'm not saying you're old, but for many years now, I have been a fan of your work, and it's been a delight speaking to you. And I hope whatever you end up doing for the rest of this downtime, I hope you enjoy doing it. I hope you're creative and stay safe.
Thank you. And thank you for everyone who, oh yeah, thank you. My wife has just reminded me, but you can't see that. I bet I didn't plug the t-shirts.
Well, go for it.
I went on about Patreon. You can get any of my merchandise. I'm kind of split up across a few different things, and that's on purpose. For those that like pro wrestling tees, you can find me on there. I prefer whatamaneuver.net. Their company produces a little bit of a better quality shirt, and there's more options available than what you find on pro wrestling tees. And of course, I've got a brand new t-shirt right now, only available on Teespring, which is teespring.com/musclesnake, which is an if you're familiar with Homestar Runner, it's a Trogdor-inspired Ophidian shirt, which is only released through Teespring, as it seemed appropriate given the current state that we're all in.
Homestar Runner, that's bringing back some more nostalgia.
You know what generation I'm from if I'm creating content based off that.
Perfect. But thanks again for joining us. Do you have anything else you want to plug?
No, that is all.
Sure? If you do, send me a message and I'll get it in the description. But on that note, thanks again for joining us. We'll be back next week. We've been Ringsiders Wrestling. Thank you.